Already. Thank you for recording. We will be recording this because folks that didn't make it can see it. And I forgot to push the record button. But without further ado, I do want to introduce two of my team members. Well, two of you all's team members, those who work in San Mateo on a more regular basis. So Sarah and Max, feel free to say anything to the folks that we have here today.
Hey everyone, Max Fisher here. Good to see you all again. It's been a little while since our last training. I'm really excited to be working with you all and continuing this race equity series in tandem with David and the React team. Thanks. Sarah?
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Ahmed and I am a slightly newer member of the San Mateo team, but I'm really excited to be here and I look forward to working with you all.
Awesome. So as Max said, I am our racial equity, home basis racial equity action and coordination team lead. So we have created a team of folks within home base. We all are providing TA with different communities, whether we're working on the HUD side or the local side. I myself work on the HUD side and do a few things on the local side, including strategic planning and coordinated entry evaluations and other things that may come up. But I do we want to, start looking at some introductions. And, please introduce yourselves in the chat. You can include your name, your race, and the organization that you are working with. And then we have a few poll questions for you all, but you can also see the questions on the slide here. And we just want to learn a little bit more about sort of where you are in your quest to learn more, to open yourselves up to more equity training and work. So you all please take this poll and I will know if you don't take it. No, I'm just playing. But we have some additional questions, a few questions here, but I really want to get some answers to the questions that are in the chat function. So two things here: name, race, organization in the chat, and then answer the poll question that we just opened for you all. Hello, Hugo. Hello, Maribel. Max, how you doing? Hello, Brian. Eva, the Resource Center. Oh, more people are joining us. That's exciting. Let me let them in. All right. So we're going to go into the polls in just a few. Give you all just a second. Max and Sarah, I have a few things up, and Zoom is acting weird. So if there are any folks that are in the waiting room, can you all let them in? Perfect. All right, please continue introducing yourself. I love to know who we're sharing this space with. I think the work that we do is very sacred. It's very near and dear to a lot of our hearts. So as we talk about issues, especially related to equity and how we provide service to each other and to our clients, it's really important for us to see and honor who's in the room. Okay, so few more seconds on this poll, and then I think, well, we're at 63% participation. We are going to try to get to 70, 75. So go ahead and answer those poll questions, folks. I know it's a lot of questions, so we're going to give you guys some time. Part of these poll questions is us really trying to make sure that we have some measurable things to consider when we are, designing training with the community, what other additional resources you all may need, how people come to this space in general. So that's something that we wanted to make sure that we had. All right, where's 73%? I'm going to go ahead and call it. So if you didn't take the poll, sorry, go ahead and answer the 3 questions in the chat that I really wanted to know the answers to. So we're going to end the poll. I'm going to share the results. So y'all should see it. It looks like how you all, whether or not you all can explain the concept of implicit bias to someone else. Looks like 50% says you agree. Nobody says strongly agree, which I think you all are being modest. You all need to give yourself a little bit more credit. I'm sure you understand and know it. We have a few neutrals, a few disagrees, and even less strongly disagree, which is totally fine after this training. I hope you can move yourself to, I'm not even going to say neutral. I hope you can move yourself to that agree category, okay? In terms of, you can identify areas where implicit bias does impact the actions of service providers in the homelessness response system. Similar results. So I'm not surprised there. You all can see that. Your agreement, I'm going to skip that one. Go to the next one. Race and ethnicity, you all were putting that in. Doesn't look like we have many Black African-American folks, Hispanic, Latina, Latin, and Latino. About 50% of the folks here today. Good representation here. I know we have some Black African-American folks register. So if you are in the room, please, say hello in the chat. I want to make sure that we honor everybody again. So I really wanted to look at if you all viewed the past San Mateo training. So we created this resources in collaboration with HSA, and we want to make sure that you all are able to sort of follow along throughout this journey, throughout this process. I always say, in my experience doing equity work, it is a lifelong journey of learning. So wanted to just, put that out there for you all to see. Rose Davis, you have a question already? I will stop and let you ask it. Rose? All right, Rose, we're going to come back to you. So moving right along, I looked at the registration list, right? And we asked the question of why you signed up for this training. So please, I apologize that the words are all together. You all know if you do a word cloud, it will take out the individual words and not the phrases. But a few things that I wanted to raise here is a few of you said to better educate myself about bias, that you're a committee lead and it's important for you to attend this type of training, that it would benefit your field of work. Someone stated that to inform their daily work with unsheltered individuals. I think that is a really good reason to attend a racial equity training, especially one on bias and implicit bias. And a few of you said that you wanted to see if there was any new tools, new learning, to stay up to date on what you may know or what you may not know. So I wanted to also share that with y'all. A few folks said it was required from work, so I'm going to assume good intentions from you all's organizations that you work for, and hopefully you all are feeling good about attending this training as well. I want to also raise and honor the fact that you all are doing really hard work. We know that you all are really busy, and adding these trainings, although can be helpful at times, sometimes adds a little bit more work on you all's in your quest to help people solve their homelessness. So I just wanted to honor that, to state that, because been there, I'm still there, and I just wanted to, let folks know that we see you and we understand the challenges that you all face. So not going to read everything here, but we have a few group agreements. The 2 or 3 group agreements that I wanted to raise here is that we will have a breakout session later on within this 2-hour block. Use I statements, speak from your own experience. Don't really concern yourselves with your opinion of other folks' thoughts or processes, but really speak from a personal space. The goal here is a deeper understanding. before we can move to solutions, we must first understand the problem that we are solving for. Particularly today, the problem that we're solving for internally and also externally, right? And those biases that we may have. Don't invalidate other folks. Always, folks, this probably goes without saying to a lot of you in the room. BIPOC folks usually face a higher tax of labor, extra labor, when it comes to doing equity work, when it comes to doing this work, because we all we all have multiple different identities that we bring to the table, right? So again, as we set the stage for the content that we're going to walk through together, honoring also the many different social identities that we all have. We're entering the holiday season. We all are going to be celebrating different types of holidays that are coming up this year. We are all reeling with the fact of what's happening in this country and in the world. The conflict in Gaza and Palestine, the humanity, the human crisis that is happening. So when we talk about intersectionality, none of us are one-dimensional. We are all of these things. We have different types of education perspectives. Some of us may have different sexual orientations. We may identify differently than others. We may be living and prospering with a disability, and folks may not know that. So as we talk about bias and how we interact with people, let's remember and honor the humanity in each other and the identities that we all may have, whether they're known or not, okay? So this next slide, you all will see a few videos throughout this. I wanted to break up the monotony of hearing my voice. So I've enlisted the help of some amazing videos that are out there, and you all will have access to them through the materials as well. So, all right.
Babies are born biased.
Can you all hear that?
They can notice differences, but they don't mean anything. By age 3 or 4, toddlers instinctively categorize the people around them and start favoring the groups they belong to, family being number one. But biases haven't developed yet. As young children, we are generally happy to play with anyone, regardless of group. But as we grow, we are surrounded by messages teaching us which groups are in and which groups are out, feeding us stereotypes and biased thoughts. Books, TV, loved ones, religious and public institutions all send out messages like a smog we can't avoid breathing. It invades our conscious and unconscious. By early adolescence, when self-esteem is most fragile and the need to belong strongest, teens and preteens cling to their groups or cliques, not only valuing their group, but also actively putting down the other, the least valued group. The seeds of bias are growing. But there is hope. By understanding how bias starts, being aware of the messages we receive, and learning to consciously reject stereotypes and biased thoughts, we can lift the smog and learn to appreciate ourselves and others. Bias can be broken.
So that video there is from the NCCJ, the National Conference for Community and Justice. They have a lot of videos on, sorry about that. They have a lot of videos on their YouTube channel, but what I appreciate about that video is that it really puts us in a elementary space, right? Very basic understanding of really all of our biases come from our familiar relationships, who we interact at school, what we learn from the media. So it's not for a lot of reasons, and for that reason, in fact, it's not necessarily our fault if we have biases, but when we understand that we do have biases, then we teeter into being into a category where we may be not only harming people, but exhibiting behavior that is very reflective of being biased, being racist, being sexist, any of those isms that we know of, and that we have to actively train ourselves not to be that way. So believe it or not, that was all introductory material, right? So we got some more stuff to walk through together. But we're going to really talk about how did we get here, right? Why is racial equity important? We're going to talk about understanding bias. We have racial bias, stereotypes. We have judgment calls, whatever we want to call it, right? There's sex, gender bias, all of these different biases. So we're going to talk about that. As we talk about sort of racial bias and bias in general, sort of what is the difference between implicit and explicit bias, and how do we teeter from one to the other, okay? And then how do we combat this bias? I really want to work with you all on some scenarios, some ways that we could pause our thinking, pause the things that we say in order to combat that bias. And then how do we use cultural humility to combat bias? So that's what's on the agenda for today. So let's jump right in. So some of you have seen this. I thought it was important for us to always start here, but we all know that race and ethnicity are high predictors of folks' outcomes, who's represented in the homeless system of care. It's no different in San Mateo. This is all across the country. We know that Black Americans are more likely than white individuals to experience homelessness. We know, particularly in California, that Hispanic, Latino folks are now becoming overrepresented in the homeless population as well. So that is a trend that folks are looking at nationally, but especially on the East Coast, on the West Coast. Additionally, we know in this country that Pacific Islanders and Native Americans, indigenous folks are overrepresented as well. So we know that there are many factors that can contribute to that outside of race and ethnicity, but that is a high predictor of whether or not someone is going to be homeless and how they are getting served. And you know, the one of the trainings before that we sent out earlier in the registration materials kind of breaks that down of why the systems that we work in, the systems that we're a part of, contribute to perpetuate those disparities, even when folks are coming and walking through our doors, which we are, the homeless system of care is primarily a system that is impacted by all of those other ones: criminal justice, education, employment, our criminal legal system is what I like to call it. But there's one more short video to explain, better explain why we do this work in the homelessness system of care.
Always have to wonder what reality is. You always have to consider how someone is really thinking about you when you experience racial hatred. The hormones change as if you were always in danger. It makes our brains quite vigilant.
Results in an allostatic load, a wear and tear on the body and the mind that people who don't experience racism simply don't have.
There's also the racism of the implicit biases and the structural and systemic force, meaning you can't see it visibly, but it is ever present.
And we take two young people that come here, one is of color, one is not, and we put them in their very similarly situated, same clothes, same educational level, same haircut. We send them out into the community. The young person who is not of color is often hired much faster. So when they go and meet these people who are hiring, statistically speaking, it's going to be someone who does not look like them. And for us, that seems to be something that keeps our young people of color from getting hired as rapidly.
So what we see when our youth show up in our services is that this can present with physical and mental stress that presents itself in different ways through depression, through low self-esteem. Physically, we might see people with headaches, chest pains, struggling with obesity, addressing issues such as smoking or drug use or risky sexual decisions.
systemic oppression like plays a big role. Systems that are already put in place for you not to succeed, for you to be incarcerated, for you to be in the foster care system, like because you are a person of color or because you are indigenous to the land, whatever the case may be, like literally your life is already like written for you. Unfortunately, a lot of our young people don't understand that and just looks at the world in a way that's just, this world is against me and that's that.
It shows up in lack of self-confidence, lack of self-esteem, lack of connection to the community.
The discrimination in housing is really evident when realtors and people who are selling their homes are guiding people into certain properties and into certain neighborhoods. Discrimination in housing leads to segregation, which leads to segregated schools.
We have to be explicitly clear on why we live in a world in which our Black, Brown, Indigenous youth, our LGBTQ youth are more likely to be homeless. We have an obligation, indeed an imperative, to speak the truth.
If you come from a place of generational poverty, then all you've known is insecurity, whether it's food, whether it's housing, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education resources, all you've known is insecurity. And a lot of our young people are coming from just those kinds of backgrounds.
It is really a point for Covenant House to be involved in those young people in order to help them move beyond some of the challenges that they're experiencing in their communities, whereby they don't necessarily feel accepted or a part of. And a part of human nature is to feel like you're a part of a community, that you are welcomed by other people, regardless of whether they look like you or not.
George Floyd's murder occurring when it did forced people that would not ordinarily pay attention. It forced people to think about and look at racist systems in our country and how those systems impact Black and Brown young people.
We're not afraid to counter the issue. And that's what we do here at Covenant House. We're not afraid to back. We let people know what we stand for. These young people just want to be something different from what they experience. We're showing them what they could be. And sometimes it's like they already know, but you're just poking out. And we're showing that unconditional love because I think that's one way that racism ends is through love.
So this was a video from Covenant House, clearly. But what I think is so amazing about what they created and is how they really explained sort of the background and how systemic issues, racism, sexism, xenophobia, whatever it is that young people and people just in general experience, how that impacts their outlook on life. And that connects to me because, and I'm pretty sure it will connect to a lot of you all, without assuming or thinking folks are coming to us sort of broken or anything like that. It's important for us to have insight on how folks are coming into us, how that may impact how they move through the system of care, how that may impact how they take advice or how they take help. That trauma that folks may be experiencing, that attitude that they may have is very much warranted. And furthermore, many of us are also victim to the same issues, right? So I think that is a really good reason of why it's so important to focus on racial equity work. We know that, you know, this administration from Washington, D.C., President Biden, his administration directed HUD, you know, to really look at racial equity work, to look at the data, to put in practice some things that could turn the tide in the disparities that we're seeing. It definitely needs to be more than just a statement. It needs to be more than just HUD through their programs. I think that there needs to be a complete overhaul of a lot of things. However, I think it's a good start, right? And I think we all have a role in doing this. So speaking of a role, I just wanted to highlight some current efforts in San Mateo, and this is in no way all inclusive of what San Mateo is doing. But I know that there is, through HSA and the Center on Homelessness and the COC, there is a steering committee that's working across multiple fronts to really incorporate to address racial inequities in San Mateo. And in the cities there are doing good work. The state of California is doing good work. So these are just a few things that have happened over the last year or so, including the racial equity trainings that we did last year, or the latter part of last year. This year, I'm sorry, that was just May. The latter part of this year, and what we're going to be doing into 2024. We'll talk more about the trainings that are coming up, but it's a 6-part training, so I won't cover everything. I can't in 2 hours, but just wanted to highlight the good work that's happening there, and you all should be proud and try to get involved in any way that you can in terms of the work that's being done, okay? So now that we have sort of a very basic understanding of bias based on social identities, right? I wanted to, well, actually have an understanding of bias. I wanted to kind of get you all's brains moving and see in the chat, or if you all want to come off of mute, feel free. But I'm wondering if there are any other biases that you all can call out or type in the chat that either you've experienced or a client has experienced. I was very intentional not to include all of them, so I know you all have some more. So start letting us know. And if I don't hear or see anything in the chat, I'm going to call on folks. If you've been in a training with me before, you know that I will do that. I'm a product of law school, and they just call your name and expect you to have an answer. So I'm going to do that here as well. So see what's going on in the chat. Nothing yet. Mental illness bias. Yeah, Eva. Accent bias. So that could be a language, and that's probably more related to a person's ethnicity, right? Their lack of ability. Cultural bias. Yes. Ageism. Big one. The age bias is there. Religion. Yes. Any more? Feel free to come off of mute. Sexuality. Educational bias. Yep, the fact that folks may not have an education, or they have a certain type of education. Weight. Yes, Sundiata. Disabilities. Good one. Cognitive bias. Yes. Yes. So again, looking at the poll questions earlier, I'm realizing that you all do have enough information to have these conversations. You don't have to be an expert in equity, an expert in bias to start having this question and talking to other folks about it, right? We have to be comfortable with being wrong. We have to be comfortable with opening up this can of worms, for a lack of better words, and really having that conversation with folks. So thank you all for participating. If there are any more, please feel free to put it in the chat function. And if you all see me move my head, I'm just looking at my other screen as I'm talking to you all where the presentation is. So a huge part of, as you saw in the introductory video, we learn these things even as kids, right? We learn these things through family. We learn these things by the images that we see, the things that we hear on TV, through the news, personal experiences, and our brain is wired. We have an unconscious part of our brain that just keeps information. One, our brain also wires information very quickly. Sometimes it can't keep up with all of the information that we have. So I wanted to just break down and talk about unconscious bias and how this may impact our service delivery to folks. So bias in general is the evaluation of one group and its members relative to another. Racial bias refers to the primarily unconscious thoughts, preconceptions, or experiences that cause people to think and act in prejudiced ways. Okay, an example of that is someone explicitly saying, I like whites more than Latinos, or sitting further away from a Latino than a white individual. You all can come up with many more examples of how racial bias and prejudice shows up, right? But it's largely, when we talk about racial bias, it is primarily unconscious thoughts. The person is not even knowing or thinking that they're doing it, right? I wanted to include this next slide in here because I think it's important to understand the difference between racism and racial bias. Racism is based on a system of beliefs that always privileges one group of people above another, while racial bias refers to a constellation of associations and stereotypes that unconsciously impact our behavior. We don't know it, right? And let me be clear here. This is not about excusing folks' behavior when they do things, right? This is about us understanding that even as a Black male in this country, I may have biases against people that may not be due to race. It may be due to a constellation, as the slide says, a constellation of associations, right? So the first thing that we have to do in this work and understanding is knowing that we all have these biases, right? So what do we do when we understand that we do have these biases, right? So before we do that, and before we break out to that, I want to take a look at explicit versus implicit bias. And my last video, which is a great video, is going to lay that out for us. So let's go right into it.
Dr. CI, I'm back in the building to have a conversation with you today about implicit versus explicit bias. Now, we've already had conversations about unconscious bias, so why am I back in the building having this conversation again? It is because I was working with a company the other day and I saw a module on implicit bias and it was hot garbage, y'all. I had to wash my hands of it as soon as I was done washing it. And I'm gonna tell you why. Because what it did is it didn't distinguish the difference between implicit and explicit bias. So I'm gonna do that for you. An implicit bias is a prejudice that turns into an action that is unconscious. You don't know that you are doing it, okay? An explicit bias is a conscious bias. It means that you know exactly what it is that you are doing, and that usually shows up when human beings are afraid. For example, in the module, they walked up to a young woman on the street and they said, tell us about a time when you've experienced implicit bias at work. And she said, well, I work in a warehouse. And I had a manager who would never subscribe me any hard work. And when I went up to him and asked him, why don't you give me the same amount of work? He said, because I don't believe that women can lift heavy boxes. And she said that was his implicit bias. No, that is explicit. He knew for a fact that he didn't believe that women could lift boxes, therefore he prevented her from lifting boxes. Now, if she had went to him and he involuntarily said that he didn't realize he had done that, then it would have been unconscious. And there's a difference because an implicit bias can transfer to an explicit bias, but an explicit bias cannot transfer to an implicit bias. Let me give you an example of that. So we was working with a company, we did a pay equity analysis. What that means is we looked at gender, for example, to see if there was any difference between the way that men, women, and non-gender binary populations were paid within a company. What we found is that women were paid less for doing the same amount of work and having the same amount of experience. The director of HR was a woman. Most of the hiring managers and recruiters were women in that company. When we pointed out the pay equity analysis, they had no idea that they had been offering women lower salaries. And they fixed it. They went back and gave them equitable salaries. They had to change it. But we changed that bias from being implicit to now saying that it is explicit because you are conscious that you are doing it. Do you understand the difference? Is it starting to resonate with you? And you're thinking about a time when you might have experienced both? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to share with us a time when you have experienced implicit bias or explicit bias and how that showed up in your daily lives. We want to know so that we can learn and grow with you. I'm looking forward to hearing what it is that you have to say. Once again, I'm Dr. CI. Y'all have a great day.
All right, Dr. Cheryl Ingram from the CEO of Diverse City LLC. Again, I solicited some amazing help in this presentation, but she asked the question, so I'm going to pose it to you all. Have you all experienced implicit or explicit biases? And if you care to share, I welcome anybody to come off of mute and just share their story. If not, we're going to talk later anyway. So you all are talking during this session. Just wanted to let you know that. I'm going to stop sharing for a bit so we all can see each other. So anybody care to share? Come on, we live in America. So I am pretty sure that you all have experienced some biases. We have to humanize this thing, right? We have to demonstrate our learning and understanding of how this impacts folks, right? Because when we do it, especially to a person who's very vulnerable or need our help, unconsciously, again, we're taking people at face value saying that I didn't know I was doing this, right? Whether or not we believe them is a whole nother conversation. But that's what we are doing here. So anybody feel free to share? All right, Brian, go for it.
Hey everybody, I'm Brian. I'm a case manager at Abode. At a previous company, I had a completely different career path before. I experienced explicit bias due to gender. So I did behavioral therapy. So I worked with children with autism. I doubled up, so I had two companies, one in home and then one in school. But this actually went across the board, and it's something that's prevalent in the whole community, in that I don't know what everybody's experience with that is, but that population is a spectrum. So they can have high impaction, so they could be, lower cognitive, higher emotional rates, right? And those cases can be a lot more physical and typically dangerous, depending on the individual, right? And that field is predominantly female. There's a huge slide, a lot more women, a lot less men. So whenever I got an in-home client where, the client is more aggressive, where the client has higher rates of behaviors, where the client, I got every hoop thrower, every scratcher, every biter, every puncher, every screamer. I got every 6'5" teenager who is in secondary school because they're conserved and they didn't want to put my coworkers who were, 5 foot, 4'11", weighed less than 100 pounds, right? And then but it didn't. I'm not the largest dude, but they put me there, and I would be like, hey guys, can I get a break? Can I get one of the cute kids? Can I get some of the 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds? Can I get some of the 5s? Like, can I do some cognitive development, early stuff? Can I get some early stuff, right? And they're like, man, I've had bosses who were both male and female, and they was like, I got to level with you, man. You got a team of 4, all 3 of them are smaller than this dude. We need you to do the heavy lifting on it. So even, and it was explicit, right? And it was need based, and I understand for safety reasons, but it was there. And I asked,
Yeah.
One of the big reasons why I made the change in home, they asked me to put in, after we're coming off of pandemic, they're like, hey, we're coming off of the online model, so your whole client base is going to change. And I'm like, oh, I don't get to keep any of my online clients. And they're like, nope, we need in-person help, because all the online clients have a higher cognitive base. So they're going to be able to sing songs. They're going to be able to do matching colors and like counting numbers and speech stuff with people online. But we need people we need boots on the ground. We need dudes who are going to be able to handle the property destruction, the things thrown at you. We need you to do that. And they're going to give me an entire caseload on that, 40 hours of it, more. And I was like, I can't. So that was definitely.
I think for sharing that, right? And I think it's a good example because, as you said, it was need based, right? The company needs people that can help and assist folks in that particular situation. But how the policy internally was created on a bias. There was one to say women could not do this, right? And it's only a job that men can do. And then there's another factor to it to say it's not safe for women to do that, but it is safer for men to do, right? Our men can handle it. So I think that our female male. So I think that was a really good example, right? And I think that is the point of these biases, is that when we are aware of them or when we know that they exist, that we figure out ways to not be biased, right? Something that the organization could have done was team people up a little bit more, specialized training. And I know that's budget concerns and all those other different things, but they either do those things or you risk losing someone like yourself because you get, burnt out and you do certain different things too. So this is a great example, Brian, because it can lead to a couple of different things, right? A potential lawsuit for one, two, also burnout, right? And high turnover in terms of probably men at the organization. There was probably a reason why there weren't many men working at that organization. So I just listed out just a myriad of things that could be done, things that could be different. But the important thing that I want us to realize is that, again, we all experience them. They may be explicit, they may be implicit. What made it explicit here, as Brian so eloquently stated, was, oh yeah, well, we know we're giving you the hard cases. We're doing that because you're a guy. That wasn't, oh, I didn't realize that. Oh, you just got, I did it, but I didn't know that you were really getting all of those cases. That person was pretty honest and open. And usually when we approach people about their biases, it's easy to tell if it's explicit versus implicit by their response to, hey, this is happening, and I think this is biased against me, or you're biased against someone. So thanks for sharing. We're going to move right along. I'm going to get you all talking in a bit. All right. So back to the presentation. A question here that I just wanted to pose to everybody. And if you took any of the implicit biases tests, either from Harvard, I think there were some other ones. We have some resources out there. We all have it. I said it time and time again. What's important is that they often don't align with our declared beliefs, right? And what we truly believe, right? I think even using Brian's example, I'm pretty sure probably that man knew that women were not less capable of doing it, but it was a safety concern. So, but what the bias creates is usually a conflict between what we believe to be true and how we are, or how our actions are influenced by that bias. And we can and should check our own implicit biases, right? And explicit biases, especially explicit biases. And if we're honest with ourselves, we have both. All right, so I wanted to break up some examples of how institutions, organizations can create explicit and implicit biases, and then how individuals can. So this example here is about police departments, right? Obviously, our police department refusing to hire a person of color. That's a explicit bias. A police department focusing on street level drug arrest, right? Most of the time it is probably on its face. And again, this I laugh because, in the legal realm, you look at sort of the intentionality of why people are doing this. So this could be either implicit or explicit. And again, things teeter based on what we know is happening behind the scenes. So this example here, the second one, the orange example, police department focusing on street level drug arrests, what would make this explicit is if they know that Hispanic, Latino, Black, or other BIPOC folks are more likely to get arrested for these crimes, and that's who they're targeting. That's explicit. Nothing's implicit about that. So on its face, we're looking at that stuff, right? Now, from an individual standpoint, and this is not a pick on police officers whatsoever. Again, I thank all of the police officers that are serving and protecting. But we know we have a policing problem in this country, and it has not changed. So this example is here. And also, I'd like to point out this example is for the local and regional government section of the Alliance on Race and Equity. But a police officer calling someone an ethnic slur, clearly explicit, versus a police officer calling for backup more often when stopping a person of color. Again, seeing a BIPOC person or a person of color may trigger, as Dr. C.I. stated in her video, it's based off of a fear, right? And you can argue whether or not folks are fearful of folks based off of the skin color, but history tells us that that is so. Now, in the homeless system of care, I wanted to create some examples that we often see are that can be reported to us from folks that are through our policies that we create, right? So example number one is an emergency shelter refusing to create a gender-neutral bathroom or gender-neutral beds, knowing that they have a duty to, per HUD directions, per state directions, and figuring that out, right? Now, there's some caveats in here, right? There's always caveats. It may be a men's shelter, it may be a this shelter, but depending on how that person, the direction from, and you all will hear this in the next training, the direction from HUD and California, which I think California probably has a bit more stricter laws, is we're supposed to be providing services and resources for people based on how they identify, not how we want to classify folks, okay? So that is an explicit bias. The implicit bias here is a shelter that primarily focuses on providing services to families while neglecting single adults or LGBTQ plus. So this is, I put this in here and I thought about it, right? I was like, ooh, this can be, folks can be mad at me, or they can maybe not agree with me here because, hey, my funding says I have to work with families, right? And we're not helping single folks, right? So a key thing here to consider is, and to look at is, how are our policies creating biases that can then be harming people, right? That is the level of thought that I want you all to be in. So even when we have a prioritization scheme through coordinated entry, how is the community creating, when we create those prioritization, how are we sending the bias, the bias may not be explicitly stated, but it can be embedded in the policies and the practices of the institution, resulting in unequal access to services for certain groups, right? And then we're asking ourselves, we have this equity analysis that we are doing. We don't have any providers that are serving people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, because most of them are single adults, most of them may be men, or they're single women, but we've made a funding decision and a value decision to help a different type of population. So we have to look at how our decisions are impacting and especially resulting in unequal access and services for certain groups, right? I'm not going to go over the last examples because I think you all get it, but on an individual basis, I'm pretty sure we hear from landlords a lot of different things and how they discriminate people based on a criminal background without even checking the background to see what's happening there. But there's just an explicit bias against people with criminal backgrounds. And again, this is not to say that there's not good reason, okay? or that they have a reason, but we see that bias. And then the female outreach worker freezes up when providing services to a large encampment of men. Again, this may be out of fear, but this implicit bias here that she may have against men, again, it may be because of good reasons. Something may have happened in her background, right? But if that's going to impact how she provides services to people, something needs to be done internally and externally to help her do a better job. Okay. All right. So this slide was actually supposed to be earlier. But we talked about this, but I'm wondering if anybody feels so inclined, if you have witnessed a client experience either an explicit or implicit bias, or if you're really bold, if you can talk about a moment when you are brave, I will say, when you realize you had a bias toward a client or to someone. And this is a no judgment zone. This is a learning zone, right? I can give you all example of when I've been biased against people. It hasn't been against race or anything else, but I am biased. And we shouldn't look at these things as trivial, but I'm biased against a certain people that go to a certain school. I don't want to deal with them, because of a rivalry between the school. But that's not really a good example. But I said that to say, like, these things have sort of a spectrum of how they run. What we're talking about here is racial bias, identity bias, and all those different things. But anybody care to share? No? Y'all are a hard group. Come on, I see some of y'all smiling. Some of you all are on camera, so I appreciate that. Is this happening in your work? So you don't have to tell me a story. Do you all think this is happening in your work? Tell me in the chat function, or tell me, come off of mute. Looking at the time. I'm not doing bad on time, so I can wait.
If I may, David, I'll jump in to acknowledge some of my own bias.
Please, Max, go for it.
I have run surveys at various sites and other communities that I work with on several occasions. And I think that, one thing I've really had to work on and try to get past is my expectation of the quality of the answers that I'm going to get from certain individuals, and looking beyond, the risk of judging a book by its cover. A person's personal appearance, I think, has a tendency to instill a lot of negative connotations in my mind about their intelligence. And the way that they dress can be a big indicator for me that I really have to work on. I think, where I see people who are perhaps in shelters where I'm running surveys who are still, dressing more adult or more professional, I tend to expect more detailed answers from those folks. Whereas if I see somebody with a backwards hat on, or their pants are sagged, or, football jerseys and more casual, the more casual the clothing, the more I tend to implicitly presume that person is not going to have as quality of insights. That's something I've had to work on.
Right, Max, and I thank you for sharing, because I think at some point, right, once you started doing more of this work and started learning, because Max is a partner, I would say a co-conspirator in our work to do equity work. We're trying to get everybody at home base sort of involved, but when you realize that you have these, because sometimes this is just normal thought processes, right? And if we're not taking the opportunity to investigate or interrogate ourselves on why, what is the source of that, right? In one of the previous trainings, we really talk about how the image of the hoodlum, the image of the welfare queen, the image of Black men as violent, all the way from the start of this country to how they vilified and created Black people as animals, as monkeys, as all of these things have just gone from one generation to the next generation to the next. So even if it has nothing to do with race, we know that people are adopting popular culture norms. So if popular culture says you come in baggy pants, you come with your head tied up, you come with this, you come with that, how does that messaging impact how we are responding and providing services to people that don't deserve that don't deserve that type of energy, right? So if I could keep it real and 100 with you all, we want to match energy here. So if you're gonna approach a client or approach someone who's coming in to help you to get help, and you have that attitude or you're thinking about this, believe you me, it is going to be pretty clear. As that video in Covenant House said, as a Black man, I see when people clench their purses. I see when people move away from me at the airport or sit somewhere else. I like it because I don't want to sit by them anyway, but that doesn't take away the hurt, the trauma, or whatever else that I may feel, okay? Someone has something in the chat, so I just want to see. Yeah, Max, it's you. Presumptions like this could cause me to spend less time hearing from people. Yes, we're going to talk about active listening as a way of combating bias. And ironically, it's considering exactly how I dressed when I was younger. So again, you may be making a judgment call saying that this person is old or this person is older and they shouldn't be dressing like this. And how does that mentality impact how you're giving services to them? You're not, I think about sometimes if you're working with unsheltered folks or you're working with people who may visibly to people who, to lay folks who may not have experience in this work, they're very visibly homeless, okay? And how we may develop a mentality to say this person may not be ready for a home or to be housed. Like, let's keep it a buck, right? I've been there. I was a case manager and job developer in San Pedro, California, Los Angeles Bay Area, the Los Angeles dock area, the city that's by the sea. And well, that's really Long Beach, but anyway, I grew up in that area. So I've been there, done that, right? And we hear it from people that may not work with us, right? We hear from family, we hear from friends. So when we hear that messaging, do we adopt that messaging? But any other comments on that before we move on? If you could just put maybe a thumbs up in the chat for me. Do you guys identify with what Max just said as something that you have also done? You're right, Sundiata. Sundiata has the history. People think he probably did it alone because that's where he rapped. But yeah, San Pedro's right over the. There you go. I got people laughing. So y'all laughing, y'all listening. So I love that. I thank you. If you sat in a training with me, I will make those popular pop culture references. But yeah, no, thanks everybody. And again, I don't want to say it's okay. Now you know that there's another way, right? Now we can ask ourselves, what is the source of that? Even if, again, we'll talk about it a little bit, but let me move on. I'll move on. But thank you all for coming. But it more towards entitled peoples. Elizabeth, it can be the other way around. Absolutely. And that's a good point, right? That bias to entitled people, where again, I'm not here to make a judgment call. I'm here to enlighten and help educate, right? It may be for good reason. That entitled person may be just hard to work with, difficult to work, expect everything and do nothing. We're going to have actually an opportunity to discuss that, right? And figure out a way that we can approach that. So I'm happy you brought that up. All right, moving right along. So negative impacts of I want to talk about sort of the negative impacts of bias towards people experiencing homelessness. I know we've been talking about this in terms of a broad concept. I always try to bring this back to the work that we do. But stereotyping and discrimination, right? Implicit bias can perpetuate stereotypes about homeless individuals, right? We already have to deal with the outside noise, the the politicians. Let's start there. Secondly, the media, and then especially just folks that have an opinion and think, folks just don't want housing. They just want to be homeless. But that type of implicit bias or explicit bias can lead to discrimination in various aspects of their lives, right? Not even about their houses, but employment. Think about how people, if they did present to their job that they were experiencing something, not everybody has the safety of saying, I'm sleeping in my car. That can impact someone's employment, their health care, and social interactions. I'm not even going to talk about the terrible things that were happening in California and the person that was just arrested, I think, for all of the crimes that they were committing against people who are homeless in in Southern California, I believe. But that goes without saying. A lack of empathy and understanding. So this can, as Max stated, right, this can hinder individuals from seeing the unique circumstances and challenges faced by the individual, right? So we say homeless people experiencing homelessness, and we can categorize and get data points and say that we know this about people experiencing homelessness and we know that about people experiencing homelessness. But when we let our biases lead our interaction with folks, that usually gets in the way of us listening to what they actually need help with. We think we're supposed to give them housing, supposed to do this. They may want something entirely different. And you may not be the person to help them, but you can't even direct them to the right place because you're not listening to people. You lack empathy. You lack understanding. Reduce access to resources. That goes without saying, right? If you have a bias to a person, whether it's through policies of the organization or policies through the community, I don't have anything for that person. So that person just continues to go through the cycle of homelessness, right? We need to check those thoughts, check those assumptions. And then negative impact on mental health. Again, I forget who coined, but it just really came up after George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. Definitely, I think the violence that's happening in the Middle East right now, but the images, the things that we see, racism, bias is definitely tied to a person's mental health. And most importantly, compound that with a person who may be vulnerable, may have experienced all of these things. I'm speaking to the choir here. And then impede social integration. I included this here, especially as we think about and how we solve for unsheltered homelessness. And as a response to people who say folks just want to be homeless, they don't want to be housed, right? I think about this last bullet point as a potential cause of why some people may exhibit those attitudes of refusing help, or when we can't connect to people and give them the help that they need. And it's because of all of these things. They've already been treated so badly, so why would they look for help? There's a chat function. Okay. Yep. All right, cool. All right, so strategies for combating bias. Build your self-knowledge. So continue to do stuff. Again, I'm scratching the surface here. It's always so hard to figure out what's the right way of doing these type of trainings. So I thank you guys for giving me grace. I thank you all. Not guys, I thank you all for giving me grace. But building your self-knowledge, right? We can't rely on our organizations. We can't rely on a supervisor. We have to build our own self-knowledge. We have to acknowledge and challenge our assumptions, right? We have to ask questions when we don't understand something, and we have to listen to people when they tell us what's going on. We need to build empathy through cultural humility. I'll talk about that. And we need to seek feedback from folks, right? We have to make sure that we realize that when we make an assumption, we research a little or seek more information, right? And then don't act on just your assumption. Act on the facts and the data, right? So you may have an assumption about someone because you know something from an intake person, or you know something from somebody else. You know something for their information at HMIS. But give that person the benefit of the doubt. Give yourself the benefit of the doubt to allow you to help that person by removing those assumptions, removing those biases. And then culturally competent case managers are aware of their own cultural groups and of their values. They're aware of their assumptions. They're aware of their biases regarding other cultural groups, right? And they strive to understand how these factors affect their ability to provide culturally effective services to clients. This example here, I love to bring up because in my work, just checking the time here, in my work doing equity in communities, I always hear some of my our white colleagues, brothers and sisters, say that I may not be the right person to do X, Y, and Z because of my privilege, because of this, because of that. And I honor that, right? But I also challenge it, right? I challenge folks to be uncomfortable. I challenge folks to think about how their cultural standing, their cultural values, their social pecking order impacts other people, right? And how folks can either take the lead, support other folks, be a really good ally, or whatever they may do, right? So I think that's an important thing. Okay, so this slide here is really about awareness. If you take nothing away from this training, which I think you all are going to take away a few things. Awareness is the first step in recognizing these biases. Again, Max talked about he talked about sort of how he goes through that. You all, many of you co-signed that. It's okay. Well, I'm not giving you all a pass because you attended this training. So if you're acting on those biases, shame on you. We need to act on and get the awareness that we need, get the education that we need, get the tools to stop and say, let me allow this person to explain themselves. Let me allow this person to enter my office, to enter my cubicle with a clean slate, without the baggage of my biases on this person. And that person may have biases against you as a case manager, as a housing provider, right? I haven't been helped. This person isn't going to help me neither. That's a bias. So if you're coming into the space with a bias and you expect this person who's going through the motions largely to have a different attitude, a different outlook on their own journey to housing, it's a vicious cycle that we all compete in. So who has the advantage? Who has the tools to stop that cycle? I think it's you all. All right. So, and we can't deny it, right? We can't excuse or ignore it. Again, I want to raise this up time and time again. This training is not about saying, oh, it's okay, you have biases, we all have them, and we can excuse this behavior away. No, this training is about we all have biases, do better. So there is action that you need to take in order to do better. Consider specific biases that you have. You all listed out a bunch that you've either exhibited or you've seen. Do your conclusions or assumptions conform to stereotypes? And then also check others. We do work together. You know, we work in groups, we talk about clients. Shake your heads. We talk about clients. We say this person just isn't going to do this, or this person really needs to go see somebody because they're dealing with a mental health episode, which may be true. However, how is that fact biasing how we provide service to that person. You may not be the right person to provide service to them. That doesn't mean that they don't deserve service or resources. Be leery of, you know how sometimes we say, now if somebody's cheating on you and you got a gut feeling, or for those who identify as women or female, you got the women's intuition about something that's going on in your personal life, listen to that. But as we're talking about in this professional environment, as we're talking about biases, implicit, explicit, how we are judging people, how we're stereotyping people, recognize and be leery of a gut feeling. My gut feeling is telling me that this person is not gonna be a good client, or this person is lazy, or this person is not gonna be invested in their own housing plan. I've heard this a lot when I'm in case conferencing calls. If you all doing case conferencing, that's probably where we're gonna hear the most biases come up in the community about clients specifically. And again, I'm not making a judgment call. I'm just bringing awareness to it. What if we thought about people differently? So yeah, that's that. So as I said, this is the time for us to go into some breakout groups, and we're going to spend about 15 to 20 minutes in breakout groups, maybe a little bit more, maybe 20 to 25 minutes. I'm looking at the time. Yeah, we got time. We're going to open up the breakout rooms, but what we have is we have 3 different scenarios. So some of you will be going to breakout room 1, breakout room 2, and then some of you will be staying here with me. We're going to go through these scenarios, and then we're going to look and see what folks did wrong and what a proper response could be in these facts and in these circumstances. So if we can open up the breakout rooms now. All right. So
okay, it should say either room 1 or room 2, and then whoever didn't get that is staying in the main room with David.
Perfect. And Sarah, I think you got to move yourself if you didn't already.
Yeah, I'm gonna do that once people are in.
Perfect. All right, so if you are going to a room, you actually have to select a button. So for those of you off camera, I don't know if you're not paying attention because you got to actually do an action here.
Okay, I think everybody should be in their rooms then. I'm gonna hop over to mine.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Awesome sauce. All right, y'all, let me pull up another PowerPoint here. So give me a second. How's it going so far? Y'all can come off of mute. We're a small group of people. Going all right? Going good?
Going good.
Oh yeah.
Okay, perfect. I love to hear that. So I think I'm gonna pause. No, actually, we're not gonna pause it. This is not anything about y'all personal experience. These are scenarios that I made up. So I think we should be safe here, but I do want to hear you all's things. So can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so we are group 3. Let me go here. So the scenario here is you are a homeless provider working with a family experiencing homelessness. The parents were recently laid off, and you noticed yourself assuming they may have made poor financial decisions. So somebody has some noise in the background. I just need you to mute yourself for a little bit because we can hear it. Again, I know y'all are busy and doing different work. That's perfect. So this is the scenario. This is what we have. And I think this is very relevant, right? Parents came in, they were laid off, and you just have a negative thought process about why they were laid off. What did they do for this, right? So the provider recognizing that assumption, wait a minute, let me back up here. Oh no. Okay, yeah, okay. So I apologize. We're actually going to do scenario 2. It's all good. Let's back up because I messed that up. I apologize. So scenario 2, you are a homeless provider at a women's shelter. You are meeting with a transgender woman seeking shelter, but you have limited experience working with transgender individuals and you really don't understand their experience. So this is the scenario coming out. The provider calls the client's name, and upon seeing the client saying with confusion on their face, because they see this person presented differently than the name that they said, but still welcomes the client into their office and introduces themselves to the client. The client, because they saw how this provider reacted to them when they were approaching them, is visibly upset and basically says, wow, I've been facing discrimination at other shelters and you proceed to treat me like this? This is my 4th shelter I visited today, and I just need a place to lay my head in a safe environment. And I want to feel safe and secure because I've been harassed and discriminated against while at other organizations. The provider, surprised and unsure how to respond, moves on from that conversation and starts asking unrelated questions to what just occurred at the top. What went wrong here? What was the bias? And how did this manifest for the provider and for the client? Anybody want to start?
I feel that facial expressions are always very important, how we're going to approach the client. And I think one of the ways that we can resolve that is by having trainings like this. So we are all aware of those. It might not be intentional, but the client will feel like that because we had those comments at times. And it has happened, it's real, it has happened at the agency. So I think training and also being very mindful of our facial expression and how we approach anyone.
Yep. Yep. What else?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
You got it, Tanya.
Okay. So I think for just partly of this, I don't think that the provider seemed intentional with their bias, but I do think that they also have never handled a situation like that, so they didn't really know how to proceed. And I think the provider, just like the client, both felt uncomfortable. And that's why they just decided to move on from the conversation rather than to address it and make the client feel comfortable.
Go ahead, Sunday.
Yeah, I think the provider should have, like Tanya said, because I don't think that the provider was planning on discriminating against the client, but the client, because of what had happened earlier in the day at the other shelter, she felt like she was going to be discriminated against. I think the provider should have took the opportunity to explain that, apologize for the misunderstanding and explain that the provider wasn't planning on discriminating against the client and was planning on serving the client.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anybody else?
I'll go ahead and jump in. I totally agree with what Sunday Otta said. Just where it says providers surprised and unsure how to respond, by avoiding it made it worse.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we have to recognize the harm the trauma, right? The harm. It's not to say that the harm is irreversible, because I don't think it's irreversible in this way. There hasn't been an intentional act of discrimination in this set of facts, right? And there's still things here that we don't know for sure. We don't know if it was intentional, right? We don't know if it was unconscious. We're giving the benefit of the doubt to the provider, but what we do know is it could have been handled differently. We have to sometimes make sure that our facial expressions, we have to be aware of who we are as folks, right? Folks gonna come and present how they present all the time, right? But as a person who's in a position of power, and let's be clear, the provider is in a position of power. This person is coming in to get help. The provider should be aware of what they are there for. So they should be focusing on creating an open environment and listening to people, especially we saw that this person had little to no experience working with transgender individuals, right? I want to focus on what happened to the client in this situation. How do you think this manifests to the client? Clearly, go ahead.
I'm sorry, complete defeat, a sense of what now? I mean, somebody at their low, I mean, they're at their fourth shelter and they're getting that look and it's lost everything.
Yeah. So how would you respond to this? How would you have handled this? Marina, I see your hand. Sorry about that. Before we move on to that question, Marina, I see your hand.
I think I go with your next following question on that. So probably the provider. It was the time. It's the time to. They have been going through all this, right? For shelters, already feeling uncomfortable, feeling probably terrible, and it's the opportunity for the provider to what Sandiera say, maybe apologize and it's try to explain it's not our the process how we're here to assist, bring the person into a private space and just maybe offer something, water, coffee to break that moment, because it happens, right? And it's not like I don't think any provider intention is to do that, but I think that's the moment, the opportunity where the provider has the time to come back and start building that trust and the relationship. Give the moment to the person to be upset or say whatever they need to say, because they have already gone through all whatever they went through. And when they have that opportunity, I feel that people do come back, take a moment, let them vent, and then we can explain where we're coming from.
Yeah, y'all are on the right path. Y'all are really on the right path. Another way of looking at this, right? And I don't think any of us are in the business of like getting our fellow providers in trouble, right? But this is, if that person says they've been discriminated against, one of the things that I would have been like is that, oh my God, one, I can apologize for what I did. I would like to learn more about what happened to you because this isn't right. So, like you all have said, sort of asking the question and listening to what this person is going through and has experienced, because you may be able to, even if this person has experienced this, you probably can help change the experience for the next individual. Right. So I think this is always a constant reminder of how we can do better. So this is a better response. So as always, and you all already sort of beat me here anyway, but again, you all know the scenario, but it's a little bit different. So everything happened. The client, the provider still had the confused look on his face. And then this is what the client says. I've been facing discrimination at the shelters I visited because I'm transgender. Recognizing their limited knowledge. Again, this is about them recognizing and being aware that they may not have experience working with these folks. And because of that, they don't want to, that lack of knowledge, they don't want that lack of knowledge to lead to unintentional bias or to prejudice or to harm. They say something like, thank you for sharing that. I want you to know that I'm committed to learning and providing inclusive support. I'm going to add in any way that I can. Could you help me understand your specific needs and any concerns you might have? In this role play, the provider acknowledges their limited knowledge, not externally to the client, but internally. Again, how do we process the information to help us better solve for the issues that may be there to help people? And then also what's happening is they're taking this opportunity to maybe learn. This person has voluntarily provided information that they've been discriminated against, right? So I think this is a very important teachable moment for someone who has limited experience in working with transgender folks and may not want to discriminate. So I think it's really important for us to use active listening skills, going back to the strategies before, how we use active listening skills, and we invite people to help to tell their story, to help us, one, learn. That's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to service them in the best way possible. And I think this is a way. So before we move on, do we have any thoughts or comments related to that? No? All right. What time is it? Let me just look. Do you all want to do another one with me? I have another example. Either shake heads or say no. All right, there we go. All right, go to scenario number 1. And let me just check something here. All right, the other breakout rooms look like they're going strong too. All right. So you are a homeless provider conducting an intake interview with a new client who is young, who is a young unemployed individual. Inner thoughts. Oh no, another young person who thinks everything is going to be given to them, just lazy, doesn't know how to keep a job, and they want me to help. Client appears disheveled. Hi, I'm here for help with finding housing. The provider says, thank you for coming in. I'm going to ask you a few questions to help see how I can help you. I understand you are looking for housing, correct? I'm going to ask you a few questions about your work history. But let me know, do you like working? Have you ever been fired for laziness or not following instructions? The client, clearly offended by the line of questioning, I'm just looking for help. Not sure why you even mentioned laziness. I think it's pretty clear what went wrong here. Pretty clear what went wrong here. So clearly, what was the bias?
The provider feels like maybe the provider got kids, so anybody with kids think all young people lazy. Oh my God. And he just carried that over to his job.
Right. And let me ask you all this. Was this implicit or explicit?
Explicit.
Yes, this is explicit. I mean, look at do you like working? Have you ever been fired for laziness? Oh, I have fun writing these scenarios. And I'm sorry to say it that way, but I mean, the explicit violation here, like you have these thoughts, even if you said it in your head, the inner thought, and this is an example of something moving from implicit to explicit. Go ahead, Marina.
So I feel that provider is already preparing himself, already the assumptions, right? And I just feel like the provider needs some self-care.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Some self-care, some training. Maybe needs a write-up because my God, just rude and nasty for no reason. Like, even if he is a lazy, what is it, Jen? I'm a millennial. Even if he is a lazy kid, right? This is your first interaction with someone, and this is how you treat them. Imagine if this person was discriminated against, and that's why they lost their job. Remember my example earlier when I said the person may experience homelessness, they lost their car, something traumatic happened to them to have them come to this place, and this is how you greet them?
Right.
And you may not have like Sunday I love that. And this is why I love what you said. This is why I love these examples, because someone could have had a different excuse, but you said something not facetious, not really mean. We know how we treat different generations, right? As a millennial, I'm looking at my mom and be like, oh God, mom, you don't know how to work the computer. You are so technology illiterate. So how I think that way against people who are older, my parents' age, and then let's say I'm working in an environment and I have a client who may be older, which a lot of us do because we know that that we're seeing a lot more 60, 65, 70-year-olds come into our system for the first time. And we're like, oh, do you know how to work an email? Do you know how to work your phone? What kind of phone do you have? Do you get email on your phone or do you just have a dial touch? So how we provide service to people based on our biases is very relevant to this work and how we're being effective. So I am happy. Oh, looky. So I'm going to close all the breakout rooms and then we're going to come back and talk about it a little bit. All right. So everybody got 60 seconds. But any thoughts before everybody come back in here to the room? Any thoughts about this? I didn't go through what the scenario should have been. The provider says, I'll be assisting you today. What is your name? The client says, hi, I'm Jason. I'm here for your help in finding housing. I need a job. The provider, aware and recognizing their bias, reminds themselves to approach the conversation without any assumptions or judgments. Okay, I will start with a few questions to hopefully begin the process towards a housing and employment plan that suits your needs. Can you share a bit about your situation and what you're looking for? So again, we are addressing the stereotypes that we have, addressing the biases that we have. And I think, well, we haven't gotten everybody over here yet. So I'm going to stop sharing and wait for people to come back in. All right. It looks like room two is there. Let me see. Okay, I think everybody's back. Okay, so what happened in your groups? Anybody want to share out? What biases did you experience through those scenarios? What skills did you all learn in how to address your own biases? Sandiata, I'm going to use you as an example in a minute. Not as an example as you had a bias, because that's not what happened. But if no one else, so yep, I'm calling on Sandiata. So my group, we were actually assigned the scenario number 3, and I think I downloaded the wrong presentation, so I can say, hey, I made a mistake. So we didn't do that one. We ended up doing number 1 and 2. We got through both of them, so I hope you all were able to get through some good stuff. But the scenario with the transgender individual. No, that's not the one. It was the young individual who was unemployed. So Sundiata said it seems like the provider, maybe just has kids at home and is thinking about their kids in this scenario, how they're lazy, entitled, and how he brought that bias into this client, right? One of the things, and I created these scenarios, so they weren't perfect. And I was really trying to figure out how I could exhibit some of these things and through my own experience. So I thought that perspective was very valid. And it was a very good explanation of how we can have a bias, innocent bias, right? Because if we're bringing this in about our kids, we love our kids. I don't have any kids, but you all love your kids that do. I love my furry kid, and I have a bias about him and what he does, right? But that doesn't mean all dogs all act that way, right? So nonetheless, what was a key moment, especially in that example, and I want to know, did anybody see this? Especially for those of you, I forget which other group has scenario one with the young individual. Did you all see where it switched from an implicit to explicit bias in that scenario? So
yeah,
go for it.
I noticed when the provider was asking the questions in scenario one, he was also answering them in the same sentences before the client had an opportunity to answer. So not just making assumptions, but telling those assumptions to the client.
Yes. And just, I mean, as I said it was just rude. When I wrote this, I was like, oh, this is rude. I like this example because I think it's a teachable moment. But again, I think the implicit bias is the scenario said that, let me go to it and I'll bring it back up so you all can see it too. Okay. Yep. The inner thoughts, right? Before the inner thoughts came in and this person, usually our inner thoughts are so unconscious. We all have them. Like, oh, what am I going to eat today? Oh, I'm hungry. Oh, this seems crazy. And if you were to voice that opinion, you would be, so surprised. When you have these unconscious thoughts, they just come and they linger in. Again, it's so unconscious because you think this way about your kids. If we use Sundiata's sort of explanation for why this person has this bias. But what is very clear is in the second part, when that provider, as Eva stated, that provider just asks and answers the question, basically putting that bias on the person. So that was really interesting. Was there anything else that you all sort of learned or that you thought was interesting through these scenarios? We had sort of addressing stereotypes, active listening as a way and a strategy to train ourselves to pause before we act on our biases. What we saw in each of the examples is providers were acting on a bias that they had, regardless of what I heard. What did you all discuss in group 1 and group 2? I'm tired of talking. You all talk back to me.
I don't remember what group I was in, but I was with Sarah. I can share what I shared in group. I don't know that it was very relevant to the actual scenario.
Yeah.
I was just explaining to the group the understanding of the message and having heard the message and all of that, just having difficulty embracing delivery sometimes. Again, I'm trying to be very careful here as I speak for myself with my words, because that's how, you unintentionally say or do something. But I think I gave the example of, an undocumented family coming into the States and bringing a minor with them. is that minor at fault for having entered the US illegally? Is there fault in that? You know, when he didn't have choice in having come here and now being here.
Yeah.
Kind of similar to when you are raised in a certain way and brought up in a certain way, you have no choice as a minor, and that's all you know because that's what you were taught. So that lack of knowledge and information contributes, you know, to when you go out there into the real world and then you start to learn and to be open or whatever. But I don't know, I guess the word bias to a situation like that doesn't really seem to kind of fit for me. It's like square peg, round hole type of thing. Like, how can you be biased to something that you had no knowledge of? I guess is my question.
So that's a good question. I think in that particular scenario, what's happening here is that you stated that a minor who may have came over here with their family illegally, you didn't make a judgment call on that. You were just making an observation. Now, let me put a little bit more to your facts or what you stated, right? How you treat that person, is it because they are minor or is it because they crossed the border illegally? And is that a bias that you may have? Not you, Maribel, but is there a bias that somebody may have because we have an illegal immigrant in front of them and you made a judgment call based on that immigration status? So that's in and of itself, you know, we got to look at the facts. We got to look at sort of what's going on in wiring in our head. Yes. Isn't that what an implicit bias is? Having no knowledge, but innate or environment shaped, if you will. We don't have any knowledge of how that person got here. All we're focusing on is the fact that we know that they're an illegal immigrant, and we position ourselves to all of that negativity of what we may have learned about immigration and illegal immigration in this country, right? No knowledge about this individual, no knowledge about this family, no knowledge about this minor, no knowledge about why they and how they got here, but we're making a judgment call based off of their identity, their status.
I think, David, just to kind of contextualize a little bit more the discussion we had in group 2 with the active listening scenario with the transgender client. And I think, and I don't mean to speak for you, Maribel, so if this is not an accurate paraphrasing, please correct me. But I think to Maribel's point, she was bringing up, you know, how people are also raised differently. So they have a different level of responsiveness or understanding to what might come across as offensive when it's not intended to be offensive. And kind of being able to, on both ends, being open to, you know, this person might just not know, and that's why what their action came across as offensive, and not assuming intent. So we talked a little bit about, you know, the client being upset and how the provider could have responded in kind of acknowledging that they're upset because they've been discriminated in the past because they were trans. And acknowledging that reality is really unfortunate, and you can hold space for them to think about their options. If they're not comfortable here, talk to somebody else, come at a later time, you know, have all these options available to them. But at the same time, I think this is where Maribel's point came in. The client also can't assume intent in their messaging that they know nothing and they come from a place of, you know, just a discriminatory behavior when the provider simply didn't mean to and didn't know. So kind of being able to translate that across in a way that's productive instead of, I guess, unproductive.
Yeah, and let me be clear, there are no correct answers here in this training today. So I love that conversation. Again, when Sundiata responded the way he did about the young person and that provider having a young person in their family, now we're contextualizing what's happening. So one of the things that I said as a strategy for combating our biases is what judgments or what stereotypes, how are we processing that information, right? It was some things that I had to include in those scenarios. The provider in a transgender scenario having no experience whatsoever with transgender individuals. Now, what if the fact stated that that provider did not like transgender individuals because they are confused by them? And then everything else went in the same order and the same facts. Now, the confused look on the face probably really wasn't confusion. It was just disgust or dismay, right? The fact that the person maybe moved on from the facts. So again, we could put and assume all different types of facts into these scenarios and contextualize it. And the best thing that we can do is not make assumptions, not bring in our things, be active listeners, pause before we say things, listen to other folks. And another thing that we can do as we're going to move on from this, because we're nearing our time, give me 1 second to get back to the presentation, is, give me 1 second. Yep, this is the right one. What are you guys seeing right now? Are you guys seeing group 3 scenario? Sorry, give me 1 second. Let's go back to this. Perfect. All right, desktop to share. All right. So how we use cultural humility, and I'm going to go through these very quickly because I want you all to complete a few things before we go. One of the things that we can do, and I think this is really about culture, right? Not just culture based on race and ethnicity, but maybe culture based on some of the identities in those scenarios. Sexual orientation, sexual identity, and the culture that may be there, right? Understanding that if we give a confused look to a person who may be transgender, that may be triggering for them because 9 times out of 10, they probably have been looked at confusingly from other people. And what has that led to, right? So I think, again, the awareness of how our actions may impact someone. We may not have any negative to you, may be very much confused because you're just confused. You thought you were going to be approached by a male or a man, and you're approached by a woman. Someone's presenting as a woman, right? So, but the reality of it is that how our actions impact folks, how our actions impact folks negatively or positively is truly what this is all about. And understanding cultural humility and cultural awareness is important. So definition really quickly on cultural humility. It is a process that requires humility. Each has something of great value to learn from the other. That's what humility is. As individuals continually engage in self-reflection and self-critique. How did I make that client upset? How did that engagement go awry? And how you are being lifelong learners and reflective practitioners to redress power imbalances, to develop a mutually beneficial, non-paternalistic partnership in care. Again, using the transgender scenario example, the provider is in power. Sometimes we don't realize the power balances that we have. So when we have partner, when we have power dynamics, when we have paternalistic dynamics, we have to remember that in order to really exhibit humility and cultural humility based on someone's identity, we have to redress that power imbalance and make sure that people feel like they're on the same level as us. So I want to talk about cultural competence versus cultural humility. And then cultural competence says, I'm the expert. Cultural competence is an end product. Cultural competence sets out objectives and best practices. Cultural humility says you're the expert. Cultural humility is a lifelong process. Cultural humility implies a subjective set of best practices. Now, here are some examples. I'm not going to go through them, but you'll see these in the materials when you get them. But because we took a little bit more time on our breakouts, and I'm totally fine with that. But these examples highlight how implicit bias can have far-reaching consequences, and perpetuating inequity and hindering individuals' opportunities, and then how cultural humility can help create client satisfaction, trust, and overall good outcomes for clients, in terms of providing homeless services, in terms of how cultural humility creates more engagement with communities that we're not connected to, and then leadership and management really creating a safe space for open dialogue. You know, HSA and the COC is creating opportunities through these trainings to create dialogue about cultural humility and how we can get different perspectives from each other. So I do want to know, what's something new that you learned today, that you may not have learned in school or throughout life or in another training? I would say let's share, but I know we're 5 minutes out from ending this session. One thing that we definitely want you all to do, and if you could do it in read to, oh, sorry, the slides are not full screen. Sorry about that. I was just talking.
I also jumped the gun on the end of the meeting poll, but instead of the satisfaction survey link there, this poll will be really helpful for us to track impact and to see if and how this training was helpful, if it was. So please take the last couple of minutes to fill that out if you could. Thank you.
And sorry for not having the slides in full screen mode. I think you all were seeing my presenter screen, so I'm sorry about that. We'll do this poll. We also need you all to do the satisfaction survey. And then if you have time, I know we're asking for a lot in the last 5 minutes. If there's something new that you did learn, or, you know, even if you enjoyed this, and please be honest. If you know you don't have the tools or strategies to course correct, you can put disagree and strongly disagree. You know, we want to make sure that these trainings are helpful. Again, this is the first of 6, so you will be able to build upon this as implicit bias training, build upon the next training as well, which is there's some resources. You all will get that in a follow-up email from us as well with this survey. And then if you have any questions, or if you want to connect with me or the San Mateo team at home base, this is our email. Our next training is on serving LGBTQIA plus clients and the equal access rule on January 10th, 2024, in the new year, and that will be at 4:00 p.m. local time to you all. I don't know if we have the link for it, but I'm sure you all will have it. But that pretty much sums up this training for today. As always, I appreciate you all for how many people? Yeah, we didn't lose that many people, so I'm happy with that. I appreciate y'all for staying here this 2-hour time block. Again, this was an introductory type of course. We could dig deeper into this. We could talk about all of those contextual things. I think the fact that you all are thinking about this in context, thinking about this and adding your own facts, is exactly the type of level thinking that you should be doing. If you just saw these facts and said, oh no, this isn't that, if you're not being inquisitive, if you're not asking questions. So as far as I understand, I think you all did exhibit some skills that you may have already had, or you may be a little bit more comfortable in asking those questions. Max, Sarah, Lodi, I know you are in the room, so if you all have anything else to add or say as we close, please feel free. But I thank each and every one of you for listening to my voice for 2 hours.
Just a quick note, I think the time zone switched out, David. The trainings are at 1 p.m. PST.
All right, I'm on the East Coast.
So yeah,
I apologize.
January 10th will be also same time as this one is today, 1 to 3.
And I thought I was doing the right time frame when I thought about that. But when I saw the link, I think it automatically said
it switched over. I figured. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, if that's not anything else, or if you all have questions for me or want to talk, I can sit around for a little bit longer. But that's it, folks. I'm going to end the poll. And I don't know if we were going to share results, but looks like you all pretty satisfied with this. So I'm appreciative of that. So thank you.
Awesome. And I just want to say on behalf of HSA, thank you so much to the home base team for hosting this training. And thanks to all the participants for taking the time to learn together today and participate. I know I learned a thing or two as well.
Thank you. Yes, no. And if you all, again, if you have any feedback, take that satisfaction survey. You'll get that from us. You can email us any of your feedback. Again, we want to make sure that these trainings are helpful. And if they are not, I am not offended. I will take that as a way to improve and do better the next time. So just let us know, but enjoy the rest of your day. Happy holidays. Continue to do good work. Continue to take care of yourselves and others, and be generous to each other and be generous to yourself. So thank you. Have a good day.